All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to TN Tech today. I'm really looking forward to our chat. I'd like to welcome Jeremy Clark today. Jeremy, will you tell us a little bit about yourself so that we can get started?
Yeah, sure. So I am Jeremy Clark, and online I'm Jeremy Bites. So you'll find my website, Jeremy Bites, and Twitter and so forth. And I primarily do training in the C# space these days. I spent 16 years working at the Disneyland Resort in California, 11 of those years as a software developer. And I worked for a startup for a while, which was exhausting, but worthwhile, and did some contract work as well. And these days, I try to help other developers not go through the same struggles I had to go through. So, for those of you who are here a little bit earlier, I kind of in that mid-level space, primarily in the C# world these days. And I think about those things that took me a long time to learn as a developer. Starting out kind of from my first professional position, and all the things that I learned and all the things that I struggled with. And I try to make them a little more clear to people. So I try to help people over the humps so they don't have to go through the 6 month struggle that I did. Hopefully they can get there a little bit faster. Another thing that I do, I like to travel and speak at conferences and meetups in person when possible. But everything's all online these days. And in my travels, one thing that I try to do is I try to encourage normally introverted developers to talk to each other at events, whether it's a user group or a meetup, because that's actually something, again, that I struggled with. I am quite introverted. It's hard to tell when people see me, speaking on stage and whatnot. But I am an introvert, so I get my energy from quiet time. But I also enjoy spending time with people, and just I basically kind of rewired my brain a little bit to get it to understand that interactions with new people aren't scary. Once you do it enough times, it's not scary anymore. You have some great conversations, and I've made a lot of great friends over the years. So unfortunately, it's a little harder to do these days. It's hard to have like those incidental conversations over Zoom. I mean, it's great that we can have user groups still, right, where we get together, but having 12 people kind of with one person at a time talking is a little bit different than when you're getting together over pizza and little clumps of 2 or 3 people that end up mingling and interchanging and stuff like that. So been thinking about how to bring that experience online, because it looks like I'm going to be online for a while longer.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not out yet.
Yeah, I'm seeing people who are starting to schedule conference events for the fall, and things are just too uncertain for me at this point to try to schedule anything. Actually, coming up on the 6th, which is Saturday, that's going to mark the 1 year anniversary since I've been on an airplane, and that was the last several years. I've been on airplanes, going somewhere at least once a month, so it's
Wow.
quite a change for me.
So we are one of those beginning to schedule for fall. And of course, everything could change depending on what happens, but things are looking positive. We're encouraged by what we're seeing. So,
yeah, and local stuff, I think that's going to be the first things that'll get started, meetups and things. But kind of bigger conferences where people are getting on airplanes, I'm not going to be doing that for a while. I will drive
that's
somewhere.
Fair. Right. Yeah. Cool. So anybody have any questions for Jeremy? Or anything they want to just talk about in general and get Jeremy's thoughts on it?
I suppose just kicking it off with what do you think are some common go-tos when you talk to a mid-level developer who wants to, you're trying to groom for the next level? Are there a few key things that you look for usually when you start talking to them or working with them?
Well, a lot of things. So, most of the people that I work with are in the corporate development world. And that's, again, where I kind of spent the bulk of my time. So building line of business applications, get data from a database, show it to the user, let them change it, put it back into the database, maybe some reports. So at its core, not very exciting. But once you kind of take a look at it and you're like, okay, who are my users? Who are the people who are actually using this? And how am I making their jobs easier? I found it to be very rewarding. So that's kind of the world that I've spent most of my time in. And I've also kind of spent a lot of time with developers kind of in that corporate environment. And there's a stereotype about corporate developers, and I don't like that because corporate developers can be awesome. And you know what? If you're doing 9 to 5, that's awesome too. I have no problem at all with that. You don't have to be passionate about programming to do it well. But kind of in that area, kind of in that framework, the things that I found most useful to kind of getting people to the next level is thinking about what kind of abstractions can we put into place so that not necessarily reuse, but sometimes we have to morph functionality. I know that, especially in my world, the business is constantly changing, right? And so kind of the idea is, what are the things that are likely to change based on what I know about the users, and how can I prepare for that? And it's not necessarily putting those abstractions in place when I'm building something, but kind of leaving a spot where I can plug them in later if I need to. So I don't want to overbuild an application, because the other thing that I'm really bad at is second guessing the users. But at the same time, if I can understand their business and what they're doing with the applications, that's kind of where I've been most successful. So and again, kind of since I'm primarily in the C# world these days, a lot of the topics there would be around interfaces and dependency injection. Those are big topics in that world. And then the other thing that is huge is asynchronous programming or concurrent programming. And kind of the way it's implemented in C# is interesting. So getting people over the hump of understanding kind of how it works and where it goes is something that I spend quite a bit of time with. But then also kind of once you get into it, it's like, well, are there things that I can do concurrently and in parallel even to make things run more efficiently? And whether that's I need to query multiple web services and assemble the data, or if I actually have I'll call it a naive machine learning project that I have, where I'm trying to utilize the CPU resources on my machine, and running stuff in parallel makes it a lot faster. So those kind of areas, thinking about the user, what do they need, and then unit testing is another huge thing in my world. Unit testing not having unit tests has caused me a lot of pain. And having unit tests has saved me a lot of time. So that's a big area. Yeah, and I'll just give an example because that's what I do. So I was working on a workflow, and it was basically to bring on a new customer. And that process was like a 4-step wizard that someone would walk them through. So someone would walk the customer through the options and things like that. And the thing is, I was building the UI pieces. So I'm doing things like, I'll say basic credit card validation kind of stuff, so just kind of doing the initial LUN check on them to make sure the number could be valid. And, validating date ranges and things like that. And so I kind of had some UI logic that I was working on. And the unit tests actually saved me from having to constantly run the application to test them. Because if I did not have those tests in place, I'd basically make a change, and then I'd have to go in, start up the application, put in my fake credentials, start the workflow, fill in the fake information on screen 1, fill in the fake information on screen 2, fill in the fake information on screen 3, get to screen 4, the one I'm working on, and find out the thing I just wrote doesn't work. And so that takes a long time. When I had unit tests in place, I can move forward more confidently. And so if I'm working on, again, LUN check for a credit card, I can kind of code that up, get my unit tests running against it, make sure that I'm pretty sure that my functionality is working. And now instead of running the application every 5 minutes to check the piece of work I just did, I'm running it once an hour, maybe, a couple times a day. And that's usually a sanity check, more of an integration check, making sure everything's working together. And, in that world, that's just saved me so much time. The other thing I'm really good at is breaking stuff that was working before. And so having a unit test as a safety net has saved me so many times. And then I can go the other way. So I was put in charge. Well, I was given put in charge. I was given responsibility for an application that was over architected and brittle. And it made sense. I was a junior programmer at the time, but it made sense that I got the primary support for it because I knew the user area well. I actually came from that user area onto the programming team to work on this project. So I knew the users best. So I was best able to understand what the business things are and go in and see what I can figure out. And then, this thing, it was brutal because every time you built it, you were never sure if it was going to work. And that is not a good place to be, because I'd have a user call and say, "Hey, Jeremy, on this screen, can you take this field and make it wider?" And I'd be like, "No, because if I do that, I'm going to have to do a full 3 days of manual regression testing to make sure that this application still works." And having to say no to a user, that's, for especially something like that, was just murderous to me. Fortunately, I supported that application for 10 years. And at one point I actually did get approval from my director to rewrite kind of the core nasty bits of it. And after that was done, I was able to make changes a lot easier and more confidently. And when I'm actually watching a user using the application, I saw them doing something weird. I'm like, if I could put a print button on this screen, would that help? And they're like, "Yeah, I didn't know you could do that." And it was literally a 5-minute change because I already had that print code because I was using it somewhere else. I just had to stick the button on and wire it up. And so, two things there. First of all, knowing what the user needs, is great. And then second of all, being able to make that change confidently. And, I went back to my desk, coded it up, shot out a test version to them saying, "Hey, does this look like what you want?" And then go through the process to actually deploy it to them. I find that just so rewarding. The other thing that's awesome about that situation is, going up and asking, "Hey, do you need a print button here?" because of something I observed. That shows the users that you are on their side. And that is so big. I've seen so many people who had like adversarial relationships with their users. And it's like, no, it should be the opposite. You should be the one helping them, right? You're trying to make their jobs easier. And if you can just kind of give little wins from time to time that, as a developer, takes almost no time at all, but to a lot of the user base, it's magic, right? And for all they know, you created this big monstrous thing and got it to them, So anyway, that's kind of all over the place. But those are a lot of the things that I've learned about, from being a corporate developer and being able to work with my users that closely.
It's always so interesting to actually watch a real user use the software that you built.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of facepalm moments where you're like, "Oh, that's what they're doing. That's horrible. And they're doing that because I built this badly, or I didn't understand their requirements. I didn't understand the user, and so I didn't build this to fit their needs." And just with, this much insight, you're able to cut an hour out of their day.
Yeah, it's so valuable. The other thing is that you're never sure what the user's actually going to do. There was this one project manager that I worked near. I never actually worked on a project with him, but his office was really close to my desk. And he was a non-technical project manager, and he was great for giving applications to, because I just say, hey, Michael, can you take a look at this thing? You know, I gave you access to it. You know, and let me know what you think about it, you know, and basic, you know, kind of usability testing. And usually like within 5 minutes, he's like, I got an error. I'm like, okay, what did you do? He's like, well, I clicked here and then I clicked there. I'm like, well, why would you do that? You know?
But, how dare you use my software in the way I did not intend?
Why would you do that? So, but it was nice because I was able to catch those things before they actually made it to the end users. I have actually had some frustrations as well, because I worked as a contractor for a company, and it was just the opposite. I had zero access to any users. And it was kind of obvious that a lot of the requirements were coming down from the marketing department and the sales department. It's like, this is what we want the software to do, without understanding how the users actually used it. And, you know, I was there and I'm like, okay, so I'm new to your industry. Like, I've never worked in this industry before, but I'm pretty sure this is not what you want. And in this case, it was a rewrite of an existing system. So there was a current system, the technology wasn't appropriate, so we're moving it to different technology. And I'm like, what I would like to do, and I went and told the project manager about this, if I ran the world, I would say I would go to the nearest location where they're using the software, and I would watch the user use the current system for half a day and just watch what they do. And, you know, no questions, no interference, just see if I can figure out what they're struggling with, what screen they always have open all the time because it's the one they use the most, you know, anything along those lines. And then after the observation, I'd want to talk to them and say, okay, well, based on your experience, what do you think is good? What do you think is bad? And that might be completely different from my observations. And it might be there's things in there that they don't know that can be improved. And then the step that I also wanted to do was talk to their manager and say, okay, from your standpoint, what are your priorities and what do you wish was easier for the people that were actually using this software? You know, whether it's like, you know, so this was that four-step wizard that I was talking about earlier, and it was signing up new customers for a system. And, you know, I'm like, well, to me, I would think that like one of these site managers would just want to have, okay, well, here's our monthly special, you know, and just have the monthly special come up at the top of the screen. So that's the first thing that they can click on and sell, rather than, you know, having to go and look for something. So, you know, those are things that I would have loved to find out. And instead I was, you know, and as a contractor, it was kind of nice because I didn't have to get in the middle of the politics. I could make my view heard, but then not, I mean, I always take it a little bit personally because, you know, I want my users to be successful, but at the same time, it's like, okay, this is what they're paying me to do. And I'm not going to be here 4 months from now. So, you know, I want to leave something nice when I leave, but ultimately I'm going to leave.
It's your funeral.
Yeah. So I tried. And I think I actually made an impact on the department because 6 months after, I got a call from the project manager asking if I could help out with some things that were unrelated to the specific project. You know, just come in and help the team, kind of a thing. So, you know, when someone remembers you nicely, I always take that as a good sign.
They asked you to come back, right? So that's that's definitely better than the alternative.
Another thing was when I was working at Disneyland, that really nasty application that I was responsible for was a calendaring system. So all of the departments around the resort would put in their items, whether it was, you know, whether it was operating times for attractions, whether it was show times for parades or fireworks, whether it was the facilities people putting in when an attraction is going to be down for maintenance, whether it's the marketing people saying, hey, we're doing a special event on this day. So kind of everything in one spot. Now, because it was everything in one spot, the data entry screen wasn't the best for some departments. And one of those was entertainment. And they were doing show schedules. And some of them, they'd be like, it was what was known as atmosphere talent. So it's the little bands or groups of people that you see as you're just kind of walking through one of the theme parks. So it might be a barbershop quartet or something like that. That's just playing music. And they would do probably 6 or 7 sets during a shift. So they'd be like on for a half hour and then break and then come back and half hour on, half hour off kind of a thing. And so they would have to put these schedules into our system that really wasn't specifically designed for that. And I always wanted to write a special screen just for them because they were also a heavy user, but I never got around to it. But because I couldn't do that, whenever the schedule came out weird, I would always jump on it immediately, knowing that, I know this is not the best situation for you, but when you have a problem, I'm going to get it taken care of, and sometimes I'd go in and look at the data and be like, oh yeah, so you put 2 locations on this one and that messes up this report. So, you can only really have 1 location here. I know the system doesn't restrict you, but that's what you need to do. And it wasn't the best situation, but, I worked with the same person over the course of probably 5 years. And as the primary data entry person for that department. And she left and a new person was coming in. And I knew that I had been successful because during that transition period, one of the first things she did is she called me up and she said, Jeremy, I want you to come over and meet the new person. And so I went over there and, they said, okay, this is Jeremy. He's the guy who runs the system. And if you have any problems, he'll take care of you, and it was just like, he's gotcha. So it was great to know that, I'd build that trust relationship with my users. And so, those are the kinds of things that really have stuck with me over my career. Okay, I don't want to be the
end, that's
only
our
one
job,
talking.
right? Oh, sorry, Jeremy, what?
I don't want to be the only one talking.
You're doing a great job. I think people are I'm really enjoying what you have to say.
Oh, I've got a lot of stories to tell.
But yeah, in the end, our job is to solve problems for the user. Whether or not that's what sometimes it seems that we're paid for something other than that. And in some ways, sometimes we are. But in the end, the goal is to solve problems for the user.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how, it's what makes me happy when I'm doing my job well, is that the user gets a good experience.
Yeah, and that's the way I approached it as well. I'm not exactly sure why I did. I don't know what my inspiration was to get into that mode, but that's kind of where I ended up. And then I did work with, the cave developers. So there was someone I worked with who is like, I never want to talk to a user ever, ever, ever. Everything comes filtered through the project manager. So project manager, you go deal with requirements and figuring out what the user wants and just tell me what to build. And I could never do that because again, it's like, okay, this has just been filtered through somebody else. And that somebody else doesn't necessarily have the same frame of reference as the people who are actually using the software. So there is going to be, a bit lost in translation. And that's not a good place to be.
So you said you were at Disney for 16 years and 11 of that you were a developer. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So what did you do before that? And I think that might inform why you were so interested in the user experience.
Yeah, it actually might be.
Okay.
So I went through, I'll say, non-traditional approach to getting into programming.
Same.
So programming was a hobby that I had, but I didn't have any formal training. I do have a degree from college that is a Bachelor of Arts in English. but it's not, it's not a technical degree. And I actually got into programming by taking hotel reservations for the Disneyland Hotel. So that's my origin story. And it's interesting because when I look at my path, I was always using technology to try to make things better. So, like I said, started out taking hotel reservations on a telephone, did that for 2.5 years. One of the things that I did while I was there is I helped with the scheduling process. So scheduling was fun because it was a union shop, and so there's seniority rules on who gets preferences for shifts and things like that. So and then the scheduler actually used Excel, but they basically used Excel as graph paper. So they would, kind of color in cells. They would have people's names on the side and color in cells and things like that. And so if someone said they wanted a different shift or I can't work that day, then they had to manually move everything around. And it was a long, involved process. And so what I did was I set up some pivot tables for them. And so I set up some pivot tables to say, okay, well, here's the people, and you type in the shifts and the dates and things here, and then this turns into the graph that then you can post up on the wall. And so, I really wasn't thinking about that at the time, but what I was doing was how do we use technology to make this job easier? Another thing is, okay, and this will tell you I started working there in 1994. So it's a long time ago. And there was a time where I was actually working with international wholesalers for hotel reservations. And all of the work I did came through the fax machine. And it was old school fax. So, dial the telephone number, stick the paper in, that whole deal. And I was spending a lot of time on that. And one thing I wanted to do, I was unfortunately not successful, is I just wanted to get a fax modem in my computer. And, if I was trying to convince, it never made it, but, it's like, if I could get a fax modem in my computer, now I'm no longer walking, it was steps away from my desk, but still steps away from my desk. And the other thing that we had a problem with was filing. These papers would just stack up and stack up and stack up, and they need to go in the files. And if I had a fax modem, I could do that electronically. So there'd be no need for me to physically print out a piece of paper to run through a machine and then stick in a file. I could have my virtual piece of paper that I ran through the fax modem and then filed electronically. So, I was always thinking about how do I do that? And so I worked in reservations for 2.5 years. There was an opening in another department, which was kind of, I'll say it's internal communications. And so I actually ended up getting that job there. And one of the first things I was responsible for was moving a CMS system. So the people who answered the phone, so like if you call the main Disneyland number and get past the recording and talk to a person to ask a question, they had a system in front of them where they could look up everything that you wanted. So if you wanted to know about, if you had dietary restrictions and you wanted to know what restaurants you could eat at, they could look that up. So CMS system. And it was a DOS-based system when I started in that department. And we were moving it to a Windows-based system, which was hyperlinked. It wasn't web-based, but it was a hyperlink system. And so, part of that was, changing the way that the users worked, because they're used to function keys and keyboard shortcuts to get to different places. And now we're giving them a mouse and saying, okay, well, here's things that you can click on. And so that was one of the things I got to do was move all that over. And it was interesting. Again, one of the things that I did as part of that was I went and I worked a shift in the phone room. And so I spent several hours listening, watching people use the system. And then I spent 4 hours taking calls while somebody was there helping me. And that was really eye-opening, because there's things that we think about, which are what are the things people always ask about? Well, they ask about the parade times. They ask about what time are the fireworks and things like that. And so kind of as someone who doesn't know any better, I'm thinking, oh, well, okay, well, I need to make sure that the system, those are really easy to get to. And the answer is no, they don't have to be easy to get to because everybody in the room has those memorized. So it's not the most common things that you need to be able to get to quickly. It's the things that you don't have at the front of your brain that you have to get to quickly. And so that, again, just kind of observing the user and seeing what they do was so helpful in that world. And it was, yeah, I'm kind of harping on that quite a bit, but again, that's I've seen
I think it's
so
a
many
great topic.
advantages.
And it's not, I don't recall that we've talked about that recently on Teen Tech at least, but I think it's so important of a concept. So thank you.
Yeah, I've had it go the other way too. Anyway, so to continue my story of how I became a programmer. So I basically kind of went from hotel reservations, using technology to make somebody else's job better, into communications where I was more directly using technology to make someone's job easier. And then kind of the thing that happened next is I was on the user side of that calendar project that I was talking about. And so again, the idea was we wanted to have a centralized calendar that all of the departments could put their information in so it'd be the same. The problem was that, my manager actually went through and counted all of the department calendars that were at the resort and came up with like 120 different calendars. Yeah, seriously, it was amazing because, sales would have their own and each sub department in sales would have their own and blah, blah, blah. Now, the thing about all of these calendars is they would always have three main pieces of information. What are the park hours? What are the parade times? What are the firework times? Because those had impact to operations kind of across the board. And so the problem is that since everybody was responsible for their own calendars, the information was different on all of them. So you go to three different departments and the parades at different times on each of their calendars. So the idea was to centralize this calendar. So then now the entertainment department will put in their information. The operations team will put in their information. Sales team puts in their information. It may still be incorrect, but it's going to be incorrect the same way across all of the calendars. So I was on the user side of this project, and I had the fine opportunity to create a prototype in Access. Yeah. Anyway, but we use that as a requirements gathering system to find out, well, what information do each of these departments need? How does it fit together? What are the general reports and basic reports that we need? And so this was a multi-year project to put this together. And so after I'd been on the user side of this for about a year, that involved a lot of meetings with the programming team because we were talking about requirements and what do we need and what's feasible, and with our budget and time frame, what can we actually put together? And it was interesting because my coworker that I worked with on this project was completely non-technical. Like all technology was magic to her. And those people are awesome because they have no filters whatsoever. So she would just ask for anything. In fact, she wanted a little thing like in the system tray. It's like, can we have like a little thing that pops up in the system tray that talks to tell you if something changed,
Flippy.
Yeah. and me, as a pseudo technical person, I'm always doing ROI in my head, right? So I would never ask for something like that because I'm like, level of effort versus how much value comes out of it. I'm not going to bring that up. But since everything was magic to her, everything cost the same, right? It's all, and that's actually really awesome because you do get these requests out there to, for things that you never would have necessarily thought of. So, but in these meetings, kind of the manager of the programming team kind of saw how I was working, the types of things I was asking and doing in the prototype and whatnot. And she had a junior level position open on her team, and she said, "Hey, Jeremy, would you like to come over?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And so that's how I got into programming. And it, definitely a non-traditional path, and definitely a lot of luck involved in that, so I can't really encourage people to follow that path because that's the way it is. So it was a great journey. And then the best part of that is the team that I got on had a lot of really smart senior people who liked to share. And so I grew really, really quickly. And that was the most amazing part. And so that really instilled in me, kind of this mindset of it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to share what you know. Because, even on that team, we did, it was 15 people, 15 programmers. So not a huge team, but definitely a lot of different personalities. And we did have, one of the personalities was, kind of the dragon who wanted to hoard their information. It's like, if I'm the only one who knows about the system, then everybody has to ask me about it. So there were definitely those people as well. But fortunately, most of the people were open to sharing what they know. And they weren't condescending about it. So the other thing that I've unfortunately, some of my friends have gone through this. It's like, well, whenever I go ask a question, they always treat me like I'm an idiot for not knowing the answer. So I can't ever ask any questions. And it's like, no, that needs to go away, right? We can't have that in our environment. You will not be successful in that world. And just to kind of show, like, again, this one personality, I'll just give, I'll give an example. So at the time we were using Delphi when I started, and Delphi is Object Pascal. And this was the Delphi 567 timeframe. So again, going back in time to the early 2000s. And then we decided that we were going to switch over to C# for new applications going forward. This one person who was the information hoarder, he was the most senior person in the department, and he was also the most knowledgeable about Delphi. And so, he was like, he was threatened by the move to C# because he's like, well, wait, I'm here and I have to start down here with everybody else. I have to be equal with all the other developers. I can't have that. And in fact, he was so adamant about it that, and the system that he was working on was kind of unique to him and so important that he got to stay on Delphi for that. And then he got to move into iOS programming. And not that we really needed the iOS programming, but he kind of forced it because, again, it's something nobody else is doing this, so I can be the expert. So, those situations are unfortunate, but I have had to deal with them. But whenever I'm around, I try to, encourage people asking questions. I I know a lot of times I'll say there's no dumb questions, but there are dumb questions. But if you have a question about a technology, something you don't know, I'm not going to call you out on that. You're like, well, I have no idea what this acronym means. Okay, well, that's my mistake for not making that clear when we were starting this conversation. So, that's how I try to approach the world. And these days I am primarily in the training space. And one reason why I like to go to the in-person conferences and meetups is I get to watch people learn. And that's really rewarding to me because when I'm sharing, my struggle through this piece of technology and saying, okay, well, this, and this, look, we're here now, and it's a path that, the people in the room hadn't seen before, but they see it now. And you watch the light bulbs go on, and it's just so rewarding because I'm like, I just made the world a little bit better, and so that's really what keeps me going. There's been a couple times where I've done online presentations to a Twitch stream where I can actually see the people I'm talking to, and that is so not rewarding for me. Not to be selfish, but it's That's the way it is.
It's challenging.
Yeah.
It is definitely not the same.
And then I know a banjo was mentioned in the little blurb. There's one on the wall, and I have another one sitting here next to me. The reason that comes in is because I know that, so when I first started in that programming department, I was really fortunate again because the department believed in education. And so our entire team would go to the Delphi conference every year, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned so much, sitting in those presentations, and so much went over my head the first time I went to these presentations, but it slowly sank in. But there's this tendency to say, oh, that person up on the stage is some super genius programmer. And they're not. They're people. They don't know everything. They let me up there. That's how you know. And so one thing that I do is when I'm speaking somewhere where I can drive, I will take my banjo with me and play it badly before a presentation. And the idea behind that is that you don't have to be an expert to show what you've learned. And I picked up the banjo 5-ish years ago, but I haven't practiced 5 years worth. So I'm still in that beginner stage that's slowly improving. But what I'll do is I'll say, you know what, here's what I've learned. And it's not great. It's not perfect, but I am improving. And it's the same thing with technology. When I get up and talk authoritatively about a topic, I don't know everything about programming. I've studied this topic pretty deep. And if you ask me a question and I have an answer for it, it's because somebody else has asked it before and I've had time to prepare it. I'm a slow thinker, so I don't come up with answers off the cuff. So, realize that the people that you're learning from are the same people as you. So if you have an opportunity to speak for a user group, do it and find an opportunity, because what you know is different from what I know. And so everybody has something that they can share. And so I try to encourage that as much as I can as well.
Thank you for that. I think that's super valuable. I always try to encourage newer developers to share what they're learning because they have a unique perspective.
Yeah, and even as an experienced developer, right? I'll move into a new environment and look at, okay, what are the resources that are available for learning this? And of course, approaching it as someone who's coming from, another programming environment is different from someone with no programming background. But you can still look at it and say, okay, well, here's the things that aren't clear that people in this environment already know. So for example, my latest thing that I'm working on is Jupyter notebooks with .NET and with Go. And one part of it was to get the this one Golang kernel installed. It kind of assumed that I had done a get on a project. And I'm like, okay, well, if I were a seasoned Go programmer, I would have that go get syntax like in my brain all the time, because you do use it a lot if you're buried in it, but I'm still kind of neophyte in the Go area. And so I'm like, oh, well, it's like run these 3 commands. And I run this command. I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't work because there's this step that was skipped in the instructions because it was just kind of assumed, oh, well, to do this already. And so, approaching it from an outsider's perspective even is helpful.
We do have that a lot in the Node world, like, oh yeah, npm install. Gotta remember that. Anybody else have any questions for Jeremy? I love that you started out with Office kind of in Microsoft Office for your programming, because that was a lot like some of my beginnings, writing VBA and that kind of thing. So I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in a corporate environment, there's a lot of what we refer to as shadow IT at Disney, which is, a department that has someone who's kind of technical and they have written this access thing, and it works fine until it becomes the core to their business process, and then it falls over because there's too many users. So it's interesting to think about, kind of what causes this, because there's this idea of no estimates. I don't know if you've heard of the no estimates movement, but it's basically, rather than funding projects, we're going to fund programmers. And so you have X number of programmer hours for your department, and you decide what your priority is, whether you need a new report, whether you need, this system stubbed out. Obviously, it doesn't work for a lot of things, especially in the corporate world. But what I find interesting is, it actually, even though it doesn't fit in with how finances work in the corporate world, it works perfectly with how the departments actually work in the corporate world. Because the departments have said, you know what, it's worth it to us to pay this person who's on our team to do these kind of technical things, because we find value in it, and it's not something that is big enough to justify a project that's going to make it through the finance organization. So, I think it'd be interesting. Metrics is hard. How do you decide when you're successful? But the idea of, hey, you've got me for 10 hours of programming time a week. What can I do for you? That really sounds kind of awesome to me. But most of the world doesn't work that way.
So you're still on the West Coast, is that correct, Jeremy?
Yes. So I'm in northern Washington. So I'm about 40 miles from Canada, and I'm not allowed to go to Canada because Canada is closed right now to Americans.
Okay. Good to know.
Are you in Bellingham?
No, I'm actually a little south of that. So I'm in Cedar-Woolley, and it's about halfway between Bellingham and Everett, if you know the area.
Yeah, my friend is a teacher there, so. So I'm sorry, I joined like halfway through, but did you have because you seem like a really good mentor, and you're in training right now, but did you have like education background a little bit as well?
No, not formal. So I was an English major in college, so I have a bachelor's degree. All of my training, I don't like to use the word self-taught, because that's not true. I didn't teach myself. I learned from other people's resources. So a lot of it, I was really fortunate when I did get my first programming job, that it was a very mentoring environment. So the senior developers were helping me out a lot to get up to speed and learn new things. And then also our department would go to conferences and things. So I would learn a lot from going to conferences and whatnot. So, and then there was some classroom training in there from time to time as well. But it's mostly informal training. So things that I've learned from other people on the internet or in books. I love books. That's my personal way that I learn.
I see. Yeah. I think having good just mentors, all around, we can be good mentors in the future, so.
Yes, definitely.
Always got the classic pay it forward, right? Got a quiet crowd today.
I wanted to just jump in and kind of like reiterate this idea of especially newer developers or people in the process of learning, seeking opportunities to speak at meetups or even conferences. It doesn't even have to be a local meetup. I spoke at I got an abstract accepted to speak at a conference for the first time when I had been writing code for about 5 months. And so I ended up speaking at about the like 8 or 9 month mark. And that was because someone named, Michael Richardson said, hey, there's this conference coming up. You should submit an abstract. And, and this has kind of been mentioned before, but, you share what you know. You share your perspective on what you know. For me at that point in time, I did a talk on learning how to learn because I didn't feel comfortable giving a technical talk yet, but I thought, well, I've learned a lot over the last few months and I had to learn how to do that. So, I'll talk about that, but there's always something you can share. And just another thing that I just kind of reiterating some points, but a lot of times, the same ideas, you can find a lot of content out there around the same concept or idea. But I imagine, I know I've had this experience. I imagine many of you all have, where like one or two of those resources just doesn't click and you still don't get it. But that third one, that fourth one, that fifth one, it does. And you have to remember, like if that fifth person had said, well, there's already 4 other, things out there on this concept, I'm just gonna like not do it. I'll work like, then, you didn't get to learn from their experience. So, even if you feel like you are talking about something that has already been, presented on many, many times, you still may be able to communicate it in a way that will connect with people and in a way those other resources don't. So like there's, definitely don't view any of that as like a barrier to speaking or writing or any of these things. And the other thing, I was talking with a coworker of mine about this today. You will actually learn quite a bit more about what it is, you feel comfortable presenting on just by preparing to present. You will find so many holes in your understanding as you're trying to like, really flesh out what it is. And you just realize, well, you know what, I can't tell you how many times in preparing like blog posts or conference talks, I'm typing, and then it's like, I actually don't know if this does what I'm about to say it does. Let me pop on over here into the code editor. No, it actually does it. Well, what does it do? And and the next thing you know, you're down some rabbit trail, and you're learning something that that you wouldn't have learned otherwise if you hadn't sat down to write what you know. So highly encourage that as just a consistent practice, sharing what you know.
Thank you, Jake. And I really enjoyed your talk, by the way.
Yeah, I was fortunate in the speaking world because we had local code camps. So when I lived in Southern California when I was first starting to speak. And so we had code camps, which is a free event, takes place over Saturday and Sunday. And basically the venue had space. So if you signed up, you were in. So there's really no competition to get something accepted. What I liked about that is you're not the only one speaking during a time slot. So there's less pressure on you to keep, an entire room entertained. Hopefully just the people who care about your topic. The other thing is, since it's free, nobody's expecting a lot. I used to offer a triple your money back guarantee for my talks at the free code camps. I have to remember not to do that when I'm at a paid conference now, but it was great for the code camps. And then the other thing is that especially this is something you don't think about if you're new to speaking, is everybody in the room is rooting for you. They want you to be successful, because the last thing 20 people want to do is waste their time. So, they're not there to watch you fail. They're there to watch you succeed. So everybody's rooting for you to succeed. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
So Jeremy, it is 5 after 5. So I don't know how much longer you can hang on. And if you want to hang on for 10 or 15 minutes more, that's great. But totally up to you. Don't want to. I guess in your neck of the woods, it's more like 2 o'clock, right?
2 o'clock, yes. Still have the rest of the afternoon.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm available if people want to hang out, but I also don't want to force myself on anyone as well. So appreciate everyone who came out today.
You have any other questions with the time left here? We have.
I was wondering, Jake, what was your talk about?
Yeah, it was on learning how to learn. That was the first conference talk abstract I gave. And then after that, I started branching out into some other things. Last year was not so great for conference talks, at least for me. I honestly, for me, it's all about the in-person. I love that element of it. So I just kind of ended up not really submitting anything for any of the kind of virtual. So some conferences pivoted to virtual later on in the year, and I just kind of took the year off.
Hi, Jake. Michael, I've been here probably 4 or 5 times, but I want to thank you, Jake, for saying what you did about contributing. It's funny, in my previous industries, I've contributed to conferences, and because I felt like I had an expertise, but now I feel I'm in the Tech Elevator Bootcamp, finishing our halfway midpoint session, and I feel like I'm bumbling around. I don't know what to share. So are there other topics that you came across that you felt like you could share in addition to learning to learn? I will keep an eye out for that and maybe use that as part of my competence, sensibility.
Yeah, so I would recommend starting off thinking about writing almost like micro blog posts. And I'm going to put in a plug for dev.to because that's where I've been hosting my blogs lately. And it's just real easy to get set up and get going. You don't have to really do anything yourself. Just, you'll have to learn some Markdown, and that's probably the biggest barrier to entry. But yeah,
you need to know Markdown anyway. I'm just going to give you that advice. You need to know Markdown.
But like micro blog posts, I mean, if you were learning about variable assignment, do a little extra research on variable assignment in whatever language, and just do a quick, 100-line or 100-word, 200-word, whatever, post on, assignment and what that is, and then and kind of do that with everything. And you don't have to publish all of it. You can just kind of write it and toss it aside if you don't. But I would say there's almost nothing you can't write about, and there's definitely a lot of. I actually find that even now I've started writing again a little bit more lately, and out of the like 8 or 9 posts I've published over the last 3 months, the one that has like 10 or 20 times the number of views of any of the others is one that, like, to me, when I wrote it, I was like, oh, this is some like simple little thing. I don't even know if I'm going to write this because everybody already knows how to do this. And I'll just write it anyway. Why not put it out there? And then all of a sudden it's like, this is the only thing people are reading that I put out there. So sometimes those like kind of micro posts on just a very, very short, sweet, simple topic, like they also like meet needs that people have. So I would say it's almost like there's almost nothing you can't stop and write a little about, create a little bit of an example code, and if you like it enough, share it. And if not, you still probably will learn just from the act of writing it out.
And if nobody
share
reads
it anyway,
suppose nobody reads it, there's 2 things in it for you. One is what you just said. You wrote it. The exercise of writing it is good. But the other benefit is nobody reads it, but you've still got something to put on your resume and say, I have a blog, I wrote about this stuff. And, you're going for a junior level job and they're going to look at it and go, oh, all right, they must know something, right? It's a little bit of a calling card.
Yeah.
I mean,
also shows you can write.
You gotta always think about the long game. Like when I first started in tech, the first couple of weeks, I think I had 1 person show up. And then there was like a week where nobody showed up. And then it started trickling in, like people got interested and they were like, hey, this is fun. People told their friends. And so now we've been doing it about almost a year now. And I really enjoy it. It's one of the highlights of my week. And thanks, Jake. And so if I hadn't kept going when, nobody was showing up, we wouldn't be where we are today. This wouldn't exist. And if you're like, oh, I'm blogging, but nobody's reading it. Well, guess what? a few months down the road, when people start to discover your blog post, they might start reading them then. You might be surprised that as they go through your back history, or maybe there's an opportunity for you to link to it somewhere, that kind of thing. I think Scott Hanselman said he does a really great podcast, and he went basically 100 podcasts before anybody started listening to it, which I think is incredible. I mean, this guy is, amazing. And that he put in all that effort basically before it came to any fruition.
Hanselman had a blog that nobody read.
I don't know. Yeah.
You're a much better writer or a much better podcast host or a much better whatever after those 100 unread posts, episodes, whatever, that when the person reads that 101st, like you're on your game, like you know how to do this,
right.
and it's a quality experience for them. And maybe, like Michael said, they start digging through the older ones now because it's worth the effort. It pays off in the short term for you. It really will help you grow learn faster.
And nobody's got a problem when they look at your current really smart blog post and they start to browse and go back 7 years and go, oh my God. Nobody looks back 7 years and goes, wow, what an idiot. Nobody does that. Right? They'll go, wow, they've been at it 7 years. That's what they're going to think.
Every so often I write something either on my blog or on Twitter, and I'm just like, nobody's going to read this. Nobody cares. It's dumb. Why am I even doing this? And then it blows up more than I ever expect. So I would definitely say do it if it helps you out, and don't do it for the expectation that it will go viral or anything, but it might.
Yeah, it can be frustrating at times too, because there's the articles that I spend 4 hours putting together, and I delved into this topic and I'm trying to help myself and other people with it, and it gets very little notice. But my most popular article on my blog right now is the keyboard shortcut to comment and uncomment code in Visual Studio. That has been my most popular article since 2015. So if I look at the stats today, that is number one on the.
You got your mileage out of that one, let's say.
Yes, but it was a throwaway article, right? It's oh, everybody knows how to do this, or it's not that important, or whatever. But it got indexed somewhere by Google, and now it's, I guess, what people come up with. So you never know what topics are going to be important and which ones aren't. And I don't want to say that, even the articles that I have spent a lot of time on that nobody reads, there's still people looking at them, so it's maybe I helped a dozen people, and you know what? That's fine with me.
Also, if your topic has been done to death, your topic has not been done to death, in the sense that, you're sharing how to do. You're sharing the comment shortcut. The way you wrote it was what somebody needed to hear, and they could have found it 20 other places, but the other 20 people didn't explain it the same way you did, and they like the way you explained it. They like you.
I still distinctly, and unfortunately I don't remember the author of the post, but I distinctly remember finally finding the blog post where Clojure and JavaScript made sense to me for the first time. And it was after 2-3 hours of reading all this other stuff, but one person phrased it in a way, to this day, I remember the imagery they used and all of that. And now it's one of those concepts that I'm how did I ever struggle understanding this? It's so simple, but I did. I struggled a lot for a long time. And yeah, just that one person writing about it in that one way, and just poof, it suddenly made sense.
I think we should kind of wind down here, unless anybody else has something else that just need to get out. Jeremy, should people check it? Where's your blog? Should people check out you on Twitter, LinkedIn? Where do you publish content?
So I am at jeremybytes.com, and also Twitter at jeremybytes. And there's also a blog at jeremybites.blogspot.com, YouTube/Jeremy Bites. So that's how I am known online. If you go to my website, you can find links to everything. Oh, and GitHub/Jeremy Bites. So
Awesome.
yeah, it's there.
Oh, I think Sarah's looking for your banjo music. Is that right?
Of course.
Are you on SoundCloud or Spotify?
That's
No, there is a recording. There actually are, there's, okay. So here, I'll give you a link to where you can hear
Awesome.
recordings of my banjo music. Make sure that goes where I expect it to go. Yep. So that'll take you to a GitHub repo for a talk I did called "A Banjo Made Me a Better Developer."
Nice.
And in that, there's some links to, there's actually a link to a recorded talk that I did last year, but there's also some blog articles that are there that say you aren't instantly awesome, and that's okay. And you aren't instantly awesome, but you can get better with practice. And that actually has recordings of me playing banjo at 3 6-week intervals when I was first getting started, and you can actually hear the improvements. So again, kind of the constant improvement and having a growth mindset is also very important in that world, but that's a whole nother topic.
That's fantastic. I love it. Well, I wanted to say thanks to everyone who joined today. It's been a lot of fun. Jeremy, you've been fantastic. I really appreciate hearing your stories and your insight, inspiration as well. So thank you, everybody, and I hope that you have a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Great. Thanks, everybody.